Okay, we're a couple minutes in, so I will jump in. Our numbers are still climbing, so looking forward to having everybody else join us. We've got quite a large group today. Um, I am Shannon Gordon, CEO of the Board List, and thrilled to be talking with you today. The Board List has a tremendous community of candidates, of board directors, and it's a wonderful place to start your board journey or continue one that you've already been on for many years. So thank you for being here. Hopefully today's session will be either a good intro or a good reminder, refresher for those of you that have already been on this journey for a little while. What we are going to do for the next hour is I am going to give you all a little bit of a background, just kind of literally a board primer on what's been going on in the board landscape that's created so much opportunity and why we think there's opportunity out there for diverse candidates. We'll also talk a little bit about the board list and how to get the most out of it. And then I will spend a little bit of time talking about how to present yourself as a candidate, which hopefully will be helpful as you create your board bio or your profile on the board list. So all of that will probably just take about 30 minutes, maybe a little bit over since we've waited a few minutes to start. And I want to dedicate the rest of the time to your questions. I find our audience always has a lot of questions about this process, about anything related to boards. So please don't hesitate, even as I'm going through the first half or so of our hour, pepper them in the Q&A or chat, and I will address them when I wrap up. So really, truly, this is your hour, and make use of the time as you see fit. So please pepper me with questions. Keep me on my toes. All right, bear with me for one moment while I just share a couple of slides with you all. Okay. And I should say about the Q&A, I won't unfortunately be able to take questions while I'm presenting because I can't actually see the questions. I've always found this a fault with Zoom, but I will get to them as soon as I'm done. So bear with me for a few moments here. All right, so just to talk to you a little bit about what's been going on in the board landscape, to give you a sense. The board landscape has changed dramatically. In years past, a typical director for a board might be a over 60-year-old white male who's been a CEO maybe for multiple companies, of ideally public companies, and is serving on several boards. That just isn't the profile anymore. Of course, that profile is one of many actually now that are really appropriate for boards and have become kind of sought after for boards. And the reason for that is that the world has changed, right? We've had this changing customer demographic occurring, for the last couple of decades, actually now. This shift in purchasing power to women, to millennials, and other groups simply has meant that profile needs to be more reflected in the boardroom. So that's been one big change for boards and the types of challenges that they're working through. The second is the pace of change has changed dramatically with technology, evolving obviously every day. The boardroom has just changed as a result of that. We need to immediately address issues as they come up. Disruption has occurred in our markets, and we aren't always, up to speed or prepared for that if you have a pretty homogenous boardroom. And so that's yet another reason why the demands have evolved quite a bit. And the next, there are many things that have changed. These are just three that jump to mind for me, is the evolving workforce dynamics. And this is obviously accelerated in the last couple of years with COVID, but the way that we work has changed dramatically. So boards are just being inundated with all kinds of new challenges and new opportunities for the business. And frankly, they just need a dynamic set of minds and brains around the table to tackle these challenges. So that's part of what's been going on in the background. But unfortunately, they're very ill-equipped, actually, if we look at the whole, to tackle some of these changes. So for the Fortune 500 boards, only 18% are Caucasian women, 16% people of color. Private company boards, substantially worse. I don't unfortunately have the statistic on people of color, but we know that 7% are Caucasian women. And corporate executive roles, quite similar actually to boards, 18% Caucasian women, 14% people of color. So at the leadership levels, we're not matched to the challenges that our companies are facing today. And I think this realization, and believe me, boards are realizing this, have come to realize it as a problem and are trying to address it, but it's taking some time. And it is a significant problem. They are blindsided often by issues that they're just not, as I said, well equipped to address. So why is this? I think a lot of people automatically assume malintent, these kind of, nefarious goings on in the boardroom. Maybe that exists in some places, but I think by and large, the issue here is that the board search tends to be heavily dependent on referrals. Our research at the board list shows about 96% of board seats are actually filled by referral. And what do I mean by that? What I mean by a referral is that a board director or the CEO sends a note out to their network and says, do you know anyone who would be great to join our board? And that network typically, given the people sending out that email, typically are board directors and other CEOs, which what do we know about those groups? They tend to be quite homogeneous. And so unfortunately, kind of unknowingly and unintentionally, we tend to perpetuate a pretty homogeneous boardroom simply by leveraging referrals so much. But it makes sense. Of course, you get trusted referrals from your network. And so I understand why board directors go out and do that. But it does create this perception that there's a pipeline problem, right? So we oftentimes hear from boards, gosh, I had really wanted to bring on a woman or a person of color or, any underrepresented individual onto our board, but we just couldn't find a candidate. Well, part of that is the pools of talent that those boards are tapping into. And so that's really why the board list exists, is to provide access to that incredible depth of talent that we know does exist out there, but perhaps is not at the fingertips of the board directors as through the channels that they're using today. The other thing that's been going on in the background is that demand for change has dramatically accelerated. I'm sure many of these events you are quite familiar with, and I won't go through every one, but just to give you a broad sense, this really started in earnest and kind of, I start the timeline with the Me Too movement. It was going on before then. But we've seen action on the legislative level. The state of California was at the forefront of putting forward legislation that initially addressed the lack of women in the boardroom, and since have put forward legislation addressing racial diversity in the boardroom. And we've seen that pop up in a number of other states as well. And even where there isn't official legislation, states have certainly put forward requirements of companies to report out diversity levels, et cetera. So varying degrees of effort there, but nonetheless, it is certainly been a pressure point for boards, and there's hardly a boardroom out there that isn't talking about the topic. And then on the institutional investor side, it's been really interesting to watch as players like, initially State Street Advisors, BlackRock, and a number of others have put forth expectations of boards in their portfolios of the level of diversity that they expect to see. And that has made a dramatic shift as well, both at the public and the private levels. And then, finally, recently we had NASDAQ put forward a proposal to the SEC that was accepted, that they would propose to delist companies off the exchange if they don't have certain levels of diversity. So from multiple angles, obviously there's, just the nature of the problems we're trying to solve in the boardroom, legislative and government, efforts, private sector investor efforts. There's a lot of pressure on boards to address this issue and promote change. So why does this all matter? And why do I spend some time talking about it at the beginning? By the end of 2021, which we're obviously days away from, 665 women will join public company boards in California. I just give that as one statistic to say that's some of the impact of the efforts that have been going on, in this case, particularly at the legislative level, as a result of the bill in California that encourages additional women to be added to boards of public companies based in this state. So 665 new seats created for women in California. The other statistic I'd offer is that the board list is by definition a platform for diverse candidates. And we have seen an incredible increase in demand, just, literally month over month. We're not even talking year over year at this point, but a 4x increase in searches just towards the end of 2020, and that's continued into 2021. So just a dramatic amount of demand, and that creates opportunity. And that's really the point that I want to make to you today, is that that's what's going on in the background that's causing you, hopefully, to be getting some phone calls, or perhaps it's what's prompted you to start thinking about your own journey to the boardroom. So very exciting stuff going on. Let's talk for the rest of our time about how do you take advantage of that opportunity and get yourself there. Before I do that, well, actually, step one in doing that, frankly, is creating a profile on the board list. So please do that. I think a lot of people will oftentimes start this with good intentions and say, gosh, I really want to put myself out there as a candidate, but never take the 5 to 10 minutes that it takes to create a profile to actually have themselves out there as a candidate. So please don't miss that step. It's crucially important. We can't know you unless we have a profile on the platform. So you can do that at theBoardlist.com. There's no fee whatsoever to having a profile. So I should just say that up front. So literally we've made it as easy as possible. There's no reason not to do it. My tips for making the most out of, once you're on the board list, taking the most advantage of the platform. The first is be complete in your profile. People often ask me, how do I create a profile that will catch people's eye? Well, there's some nuance to that, but frankly, step one is really just make sure that all of your experience is listed there. The board list works similar to any kind of search engine. You know, if we don't have certain information, if we don't know that you're a marketing expert, or we don't know that you've been a COO, or we don't know that you've served on a board before, we can't serve that information up to the people looking for talent like you. So try to fill out as much as you can in terms of your skill set and experience so that we can draw from that when serving up search results to boards. So it's basic and mechanical, but I think really important to keep in mind as you create that profile. The second is to write a board bio and really pitch yourself. And this is what we'll spend a little bit of time talking about today, but certainly happy to help you as you evolve it over time. This is really important because this is the place where you can tell your board story. It's pretty obvious what you've done for your work career. If you have a LinkedIn profile, people can just go there, they can see your work history, and they understand what type of work that you've done. What they might not be able to glean from that, actually quite unlikely are able to glean from that, is truly your core value proposition and what you will bring to the boardroom, which will look a little different. And again, we'll talk about that a bit more in a moment. But take the time to write it. And I would say, please don't let perfect be the enemy of good. I also talk to candidates that spend years putting together a board bio, and it's just not necessary. Well, one, it's not necessary. And two, if it's sitting on your computer, no one else can see it. So make it live, put it on the board list, and continue to evolve it over time. And as you get feedback and as you have conversations and you learn about yourself as a candidate, you can always evolve that bio to refine it. But I think just putting out your best effort in a first pass is great. My next recommendation is to seek recommendations. So as I said at the beginning, most board seats are filled via referral. And so one of the things that we try to do on the board list is, rather than reshape people's behaviors, actually leverage what they're already doing, which is referring each other to the boardroom. What we want to do is be able to enhance and add credibility to your profile by having people in your network that have board experience give you recommendations so that other board directors can see what they have to say about you, and it will add to your credibility. We think this is particularly important for candidates that the board director searching doesn't know, which is oftentimes the case on the board list. If they're comparing candidates on the board list that they don't know and they don't really have a connection to somebody that they got a referral from direct email, that's a hard comparison to make. So the more that we can mimic the recommendation process and really get that sort of validating component added to your profile, the better. So I suggest to candidates to go out to board directors that that are in your network, be them nonprofit, for-profit, public company directors, people that understand what it's like in a boardroom and can speak on your behalf and what you might be like in the boardroom yourself. So please add that as well. And then the last I would say is, we do offer candidate advisory services. If all of this has you a little bit frazzled and you're feeling like you need a lot more help or support in the process, we certainly can do customized coaching and feedback for you. So you can find information about that and sign up for a session with our staff under services on theboardlist.com. So those are a couple of ways to get started and to make the most out of the board list. So a bit administrative to date. So let's get into actually talking about how to talk about yourself as a candidate. How do you create this profile and how do you help it stand out? It's about telling a story. As we know, a story is going to be so much more compelling than just a resume that lists the things that you've done. What we want to do is bring that experience to life and really communicate out there to the world what it is that makes you unique, what it is that you do better than, virtually all of your peers, right? What is it that you're bringing that that board that you're targeting must have? So we want to create that story for you. And I've developed this framework, which I think has been helpful for candidates in figuring out how to come about your value proposition, because it's easy to say, right? Communicate your value proposition. But what in the world do we mean by that? I always suggest that people start with the blue circle, which is what you're passionate about. That might be, something business oriented, right? It might be an industry, it might be a type of product, it might be a customer base, it might be a lot of different things. A functional area, who knows what it is that excites you. It also might be something from your personal life. I've had a lot of people tell me, gosh, in my, day job, I work for a hospital system, but in my personal life, I'm absolutely passionate about travel and I just would love to work with a hotel chain. And that, that's actually a legitimate example that somebody has given me, and they've ended up being on the board of a large hotel company. So think broadly about your passion areas, and really be introspective about what it is that would get you excited and out of bed to serve on that board. The reason why I think this is important, not only is it that it will be more fulfilling work for you and you're more likely to do good work on a board like that, is that the reality is that board service is, of course, on top of everything else that you do, right? Your day job, if you're in an operating role, this is going to be additional, right? It's going to carve into your personal time, your family time, et cetera. And I find that works well only when you're really excited about what it is that you're working on. So it's important to really identify that. And you might not nail it exactly for your very first board, but I think being in the realm of what you're excited about is important. So start there. The next area that I suggest candidates go to is their areas of expertise. So this is where you shift a little bit more to your business experience that you've had in jobs and roles that you've had, say, over the last 10, 15, 20 years, whatever your career trajectory has looked like. That's not to say, by the way, that you have to have 20 years of experience to be a board director. Please don't take it that way. We certainly have those that have far less experience, but pretty significant experience in a particular area that get on boards as well. But what you'll want to identify here typically is not just the laundry list. And actually those that have the 20 years of experience are actually at greatest risk for creating the laundry list of activities that they've done, functions that they've worked in, especially those at the C-suite level that have worked in so many different roles and can be conversant and strong in many different functional areas. We don't want the laundry list in this case. What we want instead is the 2 to 3 areas, again, where you really stand out, ideally, even outside of your company, within your industry. If you've ever been sought after to speak at a conference, or you've ever been, followed for some thought piece that you've put on LinkedIn, what are those topics? What are the ones where you're actually starting to influence beyond sort of executing in your day job? So that's one kind of hint for what might be an area of expertise to highlight. The other is, and actually I'm going to flip back and forth between slides here for a moment. The other is to think about skills that are typically in high demand. So boards oftentimes, by the way, this is a very limited list. We get calls for board directors on all different topics. Please don't think that these are the only things that boards are interested in. But these are areas that are quite attractive to boards, and we tend to get asked for a lot. And in no particular order, right? Talent and culture leveraged as a strategic asset. What I mean by that is, we're all in a war for talent. We're all trying to secure the very best people to help our businesses move forward. And so boards are exactly the same, and also trying to coach their companies and their executive teams into how to do that effectively. In fact, it can be one of the central strategic issues that a company is facing. And so, if you have a background in that can be very attractive to boards. Emerging technologies is another area. I've listed cybersecurity, AI, IoT, AR, VR. I mean, the list goes on. Obviously, a new one pops up every day. But emerging technologies, imagine, again, a boardroom that maybe has leaned more heavily on somebody with maybe some CEO experience, or perhaps it's a board that is on the older end of the spectrum, literally age-wise, and just hasn't come across these new technologies in their career. It can be for any number of reasons. But having expertise can be a really important voice and very important in helping the company mitigate risk, especially as these become disruptive technologies. Specific customer segments, I list millennials here simply because oftentimes people don't think, in their 30s maybe, that they're ready for serving on a board. But there are many boards that are trying to figure out, gosh, we used to serve a population that is now not our core customer anymore. And in fact, we desperately need to understand millennials, or whatever the group is. And so, we need somebody in the boardroom that literally has that voice that can help us understand better this customer, so that we can take advantage of opportunities, so that we can mitigate risk around addressing their needs. So if you have that perspective, either because you are a millennial or because you've worked closely with that customer segment, that's another area that it can be very attractive. Digital transformation, always important. I mean, if you think about some of the top strategic issues companies deal with, this is certainly one of them. And there are industries that are still very much at the beginning of this curve. And so that can be a valuable skill set. It might not be exactly in the industry that you've worked in. If you have digital transformation experience in a particular industry, that could easily be applicable in another industry that you've actually never come across before. That's more of kind of a functional area of expertise, and not necessarily industry. Growth and scaling. I should actually redo this page and put that one at the top, because I think that is probably the top thing that we get asked for, but with some dimension and specificity around it. So what I mean by that is, a company is unlikely to bring on a board director. I should caveat this by saying there are always exceptions to everything I'm going to say. This is a general rule of thumb, that a company oftentimes will not be interested in a board director that has never experienced the type of growth or scale that the company is currently in or about to go through. For an example, somebody that has been a CEO and has built a really impressive, amazing $50 million revenue business might not be the ideal candidate for a company that is at 100 million in revenue looking to grow to 500 million, simply because if any of you have been involved in those different stages of company growth, the challenges that companies face at those stages are quite different. And so what you want as a board director is to have had exposure to some of these challenges, so that you can help the company and the executive team see around the corner to understand what might be coming next. That's really the value that you would add. So as you think about growth and scaling, think about the type of growth that you've seen, what stage of growth, and what kind of scale you've seen achieved, how that's happened, et cetera. And those types of companies, those that are about to embark on that journey, are the ones that are most likely going to be interested in your background. And then transaction experience. Clearly one of the topics that oftentimes gets talked about in the boardroom is transactions, whether that is liquidity events around, IPO, or M&A. Those are very valuable experiences, especially if you've done it multiple times, right? If you've seen if you've been part of a couple of acquisitions, and maybe one instance been on the acquirer team and another instance been on the acquiree team, or the acquired company, that offers perspective that can be very helpful to those, again, that are about to embark on that opportunity. So again, a short list just to give you a few examples, but as you think about your expertise, you want to kind of think about it across the arc of your career, where you might have multiple examples of how you've, for example, leveraged talent and culture as a strategic asset, not just maybe the work you've done in the last 3 months. So that's something to think about on your areas of expertise. So hopefully we're starting to get some overlap between your areas of passion and your areas of expertise. And the last pillar of this stool, or my third circle of the Venn diagram, is the expertise that a company needs. And I touched on this when I was addressing the other slide on, gosh, what might be going on in the boardroom? And what I always suggest that candidates do is take the question of what you're passionate about and create a list of companies that you think you would be really interested in serving on the board. At this point, it doesn't even matter if it's realistic, right? You could say a company that comes up all the time, right? So many people love Peloton, right? I want to serve on the Peloton board, especially in the height of COVID. This was something people are excited about. So write down Peloton and then start to think about, well, what could Peloton be struggling with in their boardroom? Talking about what opportunities could they see? Do you have any expertise in those areas? So it's all about, you're really marketing yourself. And so this is all about product market fit. You're trying to figure out, if I'm the product, where in this market do I fit? And in order to do that, you really have to understand the market. So if you can get specific about your wish list of companies and what you think is going to be the types of skills, of course, you can't know what the board makeup is and what necessarily that company is exactly working on at that moment in time. But if you are passionate about it, and especially if you have some expertise in that industry or in that kind of functional area, you probably got a pretty good guess. So that's absolutely worth thinking about. And then you start to weave the picture together, right? You've got what you're passionate about, your areas of expertise, and what you think the company is going to need. And where you see overlap, that's your unique value proposition. So hopefully you're starting to get some seeds for what your value proposition might be. Continue to germinate on those. And by the way, I should also offer, if we have a little time in the Q&A and somebody wants to pop their value proposition in chat, I'm happy to give feedback on it to as many as I can get through in the session. So hopefully that's a little incentive to get going on it already. All right, so this is all, again, a little bit hopefully practical and helpful, but also a little bit ambiguous until we see some examples. So let's actually look at some. I've taken a couple of profiles from the board list and anonymized them and put them in here. And I want to share with you 2 that I think are really well done, and then 2 that I think are slightly less effective, and explain to you why. And then we'll shift over to your questions. So the first one, I'll try to either skim it or read very quickly here so we don't get too bogged down. But Jane is a senior technology executive who articulates strategies for growth and scale in Fortune 500 and private companies, including, and she names the companies. As a marketing and technology leader, Jane drives global execution of strategic initiatives and directs acquisitions and divestitures to ensure an organization's continued technological relevance. A mouthful, but quite specific, right? Her broad leadership includes experience in fast-growing sectors like cloud computing, mobile, online payments, e-commerce. She's distinguished as a powerful advisor in this age of digital disruption and transformation. Wow, I get a lot of information about Jane. One thing that I find people very hesitant to do in their value propositions and in their board bios is get as specific as Jane has been here. And the reason is they're afraid of closing doors. And I always advise people, if you have joined any of my events or I've ever come across you before, you've probably heard me say, you do not want to be a jack of all trades and master of none. To give you a little bit of an idea of the way that a board comes up with a spec for a board director, they'll oftentimes, if they're a good board and following best practices, will come up with a skills matrix, which is typically, a list of areas that they think are strategic challenges and opportunities for their business over the next several years. And then they'll map out their existing board directors and how the board directors' skills match up with those challenges and opportunities. And usually that grid will surface some gaps where they don't have coverage on some of the areas that are going to be critically important for the company. And that's typically the genesis of a spec. That usually is going to be pretty specific. And so when you have someone with a general background that just says, I'm good in everything, and they laundry list all of the things that they've done in their career, they kind of just get glazed over. And a value proposition like this, which is, I've worked in marketing and technology, I've had global experience, I've specifically worked on strategic initiatives and acquisitions and divestitures, right? Again, around that transaction piece, to make sure that a company stays technologically relevant. So this is all about digital transformation. And then I get even more specific here about the industries that I've worked in: cloud computing, mobile, online payments, and e-commerce. So I'm not going to look at this person for, say, the financial sector or whatever. So this individual, Jane, is probably moving herself out of some opportunities and very squarely in some. And so this has actually been, this is a real candidate and someone who's been very successful in landing board opportunities, not just because she has a great board bio, of course, but this is how she's talked about her experience. Sarah's is actually similar in some ways, but I wanted to offer this as an example as a financial professional. Sarah's an experienced global finance and capital markets executive with a track record in strategic business development and deal execution, and she's talked about the banks that she's worked for or with. She's provided advice to CEOs seeking to leverage public and private capital markets and their growth objective, and again, talks about the industries: manufacturing, retail, hospitality, oil and gas. She's built multi-jurisdictional businesses with large, international corporations, as well as scaled 2 businesses as a mission-driven entrepreneur. She's packed a lot of information into these 2 short paragraphs, and I have a pretty clear view of the type of work that she's done. It's all about financing growth opportunity for businesses in particular industries. Though I would venture a guess that Sarah could easily kind of pop into another industry, given that she's worked for a bank and likely had experience looking at a number of different industries. I get the international piece. She's worked with large corporations, and I know that she's been an entrepreneur. So you could start to see some opportunities surface there as well. So I think what's nice about both of these examples is that they are specific enough to give me a very good sense of who these candidates are and what types of opportunities they're going to be great for. And also not so specific that we can still imagine a good number of companies being really interested in these kinds of backgrounds. These are challenges. These individuals are strong in areas where companies are oftentimes struggling. So that's a really nice kind of Venn diagram if you think back to the framework that they've created here. So slightly less effective, my next 2, our friend Jack was most recently Alpha Corp's Senior Vice President of Strategy, reporting to the CEO. He is responsible for strategy, real estate and development, and operations of Alpha's physical stores, online stores, and contact centers. So I happen to know what Alpha Company is because I did making this generic, and it's a really impressive company. Like, you would totally want to hire this person for a job. But it doesn't really tell me how Jack is different from maybe the 10 other SVPs of strategy that I might be looking at that may also have experience in real estate development, strategy, operations, right? It doesn't give me the unique part. It gives me the value proposition a little bit. I get a little bit of a sense for what Jack does, but it doesn't give me the unique piece. So I feel like that's what's missing with this value proposition. And then Julie, similarly, she writes, Julie is Chief Executive Officer of Beta Corp. Prior to joining Beta Corp, Julie served as Chief Marketing Officer for Omega Corp, Chief Marketing Officer of Epsilon Corp. You get the idea. I won't read the rest. This is the laundry list one that just reads basically like the resume. I would know this if I looked at her LinkedIn profile or, saw her CV. And I feel like it really does miss kind of the value proposition piece. So I know, obviously, I'm sure all these companies are very impressive, and it's very solid and impressive work that Julie's done, but I just can't quite understand what is it that's about Julie versus every other CMO that I might talk to that's going to add value to our board, and why would we choose her over somebody else, over say Jack, for example. So hopefully that's helpful to put a little dimension around what we talked about with value propositions. I would strongly encourage you to give it a shot. Start writing yours down. You obviously, as I said, can always leverage the board list for feedback on that through our candidate advisory services. But I also would encourage you to leverage your own network. You've got great feedback sitting right in front of you. These are people that know you well, and you can think about how to use your network differently, right? There are going to be some that are going to react to your value proposition and say, wow, that really captures you, or gosh, you really have undersold yourself, which is usually the case. There are others that might be really helpful in making introductions to boards for you. And there are others that actually can serve more as a sponsor, really, and be actively finding opportunities. So you can kind of parse out and segment your network accordingly, but leverage them. You've built the network over your whole career, and it's time to make the withdrawal after all of those deposits. So ask for help in this process and this journey, whether it's resources like the board list or people that you already know. And you can continue to refine it. But as I said, don't be afraid of it being perfect. Just make sure it gets out there. All right, so we have a lot of questions. I'm going to jump over. Let me stop sharing my screen so that I can see you all. And I'm just going to jump right into, I'll have the chat and the Q&A open because it looks like folks have put questions in both. Okay, first question. How do you recommend candidates with a perceived, not real, conflict of interest to address this in their board bio so they aren't immediately turned away? That's a good question. We get a lot of questions about conflict of interest. I think, without a little more specific, it will be hard for me to answer that directly. So this individual, feel free to reach out to us and we can talk more specifically about the perceived conflict of interest. But generally, I think, that's probably best addressed, frankly, in the conversations that you're going to have with the board. You can assure them why you believe it's not a conflict of interest. There may be some reason why it actually is that you might not know. But these are good and important topics to actually bring up with the board, to bring up with the company that you're working for. Absolutely. And make sure that everybody's comfortable with it. So my recommendation would be actually to not try to address it in a board bio, and instead have it surface as part of the conversations, and proactively surface it yourself, because you wouldn't want to keep something like that. It doesn't sound like that's the intention at all, but you don't want to sort of have that discovered at the last minute. That's actually something you'd want to tackle early on in your conversations. So I think, in the board bio, I would just talk, again, without the specifics here, hard to give direct advice, but I think to be able to talk about your work maybe somewhat more broadly, and not surface that conflict of interest so as to not turn people away, would be my advice on this situation. Okay, next question. How many companies and or recruiters do you have which use the board list as a source for board members? What is your rate of success in securing roles for your members? Great. So the answer is thousands of companies come to the board list to search. And I should tell you that to give you a little bit of a sense for the types of companies that may be looking at your profile, we serve companies at all stages. So we might have a Series A venture-backed startup that is looking for a director that needs, I don't know, some CEO coaching because they have a very young founder, all the way to public company board service, to creating SPAC boards, to private equity-backed companies. We have a very wide range, legitimately. And actually about 3/4 of our searches are private company searches. So that's actually, I want to just take a moment and say that's quite interesting and exciting, because especially for first-time board directors, private companies are slightly less likely, I would say, to have the hurdle of needing prior board experience to serve on the board. So for first-time board directors, that's a tremendous pool of opportunity for you. And I also think a really exciting place to serve on a board, because it's, I think, a little less, it can be interesting to work for a high growth company, and really focus on some of the strategies there. So I'd really encourage you to think about those types of opportunities. We do not, however, work with nonprofits. We've done a handful of them over time. It's usually larger nonprofits, but really we're a for-profit company platform. So the answer is several thousand companies come of all different shapes and sizes. Rates of success in securing roles for our members. It depends totally. I mean, that number is shifting all the time because we have candidates joining all the time. But typically what we suggest in talking about kind of success rates overall, what we suggest is that think of the board list as one of the many nodes that you'll use on your board journey. There's no reason not to have a profile on the board list, because, as I said, it's free, and it's, you never know who's going to find you and see your profile and decide that you're the perfect candidate for them. So please do that for yourself. I would strongly recommend it. But don't stop there. I would say go talk to recruiters. The recruiters that call you for operating roles, if you're not interested in the operating role, politely turn them away, or refer them, even better, to other diverse candidates, and then tell them about your board aspirations. Use other organizations. There are nonprofits out there that help people with their board search, etc. So I think this is about having a multi-pronged strategy. And there's no one formula that's going to be successful. You may get a call tomorrow from a referral that has nothing to do with any of these platforms, right? But I think the more places that your name shows up as a candidate, the more likely you are to find that opportunity that's the right fit for you. Let's see, the next one is from a Canadian. Fantastic. We love having the Canadians on here. I'm in Canada. The top 100 publicly listed companies have now got to 31% females on their boards. However, they have even less female executives. A few weeks ago, I counted all female management pictured on their website. This sometimes includes senior management and executives, and even then it was only 22%. Okay, so this looks like it's a comment and said, yes, I mean, it's your numbers actually are pretty close to the ones that I quoted at the beginning of the presentation. It's pretty abysmal, and it actually, as I said, it kind of leads to this pipeline problem. If boards, part of the work that we also do with boards, we're talking to you today as candidates, but on the flip side, we also talk with boards about about general ESG and sort of the need to have a diverse board to tackle some of the challenges that these companies are facing. And part of the challenge is when they put together a spec or a profile that says we must have someone with CEO experience, as an example. Well, the percentage of CEOs that are out there that are female or people of color is actually, unfortunately, very low. And so part of the work that we do is talking to boards about, well, what really do you need for this position? Is it truly that you need a CEO? Or is it that you're looking for someone with great P&L experience? And can we find that in a different profile? So anyway, just a reaction to your comment, I think it is a global problem, obviously, you see it in Canada as well, and it's significant and it goes deeper than just boards. All right. Oh, and there's a follow-up question. Sorry. How do we change this? So the way that we change this, I'm glad that you asked that question. Slightly off the topic of becoming a candidate yourself, but I think the way that we change this is, one, there's obviously, as I mentioned, a lot going on in the general landscape to help. Legislation, institutional investment firms. I think that is probably perhaps the most powerful level, setting expectations for their portfolio companies. But one thing that we can do, and that I see so many people doing, is once into the boardroom, this may or may not be helpful to those of you on the call today, but once in the boardroom, women, people of color, turn around and pull up those that come behind you. And that is happening a lot. I think people recognize that those that have had the opportunity to serve on boards understand the importance of creating diverse boards, understand the role and value that they've been able to bring to the boards that they've been on, and are actively working to bring on others like them. So I think, this is about being cognizant of the fact that it needs to change and creating opportunity for yourself and for others as you go. So thanks for that. The next one is it useful to be certified by a board member course or institution? Love this question. I get this a lot. Let me just preface this by saying that there are a lot of board prep programs. We at the Board List don't do one exactly. I mean, we do events that hopefully are helpful to candidates, but it's not as in-depth as some of these more official programs. One institution is called the NACD, National Association of Corporate Directors, which is an incredible resource. There's a membership fee, but they also have free content and information available. I'd encourage you all to take a read or a look at what they have. But they do have a course that I've heard wonderful things about, and many universities. Stanford has one, Harvard has one, I believe Northwestern has one. These are all universities that offer 3, 4, 5-day courses, usually over a weekend, for people to learn about board service. And I think the feedback we've always gotten from candidates is that it's very helpful. So I would certainly encourage it. What I would say is that we don't typically get requests from boards that say, I only want to talk to candidates that have this certification or validation. It is more used instead as sometimes an onboarding tool. Oftentimes boards will pay, or I shouldn't say oftentimes, sometimes boards will pay for candidates to take that course once they've been brought onto the board to help them get up to speed, particularly if they've never served on a board before. And that's quite useful. But on the candidate side, I think the reason it's so useful is that as you start getting into some of these interviews, one, it's really helpful to just have the vernacular and understand structure and committees and the types of things that boards are talking about. And the other reason is that you start getting familiar with some of the content, some of the topics that boards are struggling with, working through right now. And that can help you just feel more well-versed as you go through the interview process. So short answer to your question, yes, it's useful. Don't think of it as a prerequisite, but I think very useful for candidates, and useful as a tool for boards to help their board directors get up to speed once they bring them on. There's a question about whether or not the skills, I presume, that I listed in the presentation differ between public and private companies. That's a good question. Yes and no. I would say, to be honest, I actually think that the skills that are sought after are just so highly dependent on each specific company, as you might imagine, right? The strategic challenges and opportunities that a company faces are really going to be unique to that company. There may be some that are common in the market or common to the industry, or a common sort of functional area that a company is struggling with, or at a particular stage of growth. Um, but but really tend to be company specific. So I wouldn't say that the skill set is different. What I would say is that in general, the bar for serving on a public company board tends to be a little bit higher than private companies. I don't mean that in quality or caliber of talent. What I mean by that is the depth of experience in governance actually tends to be higher for public company service. So usually a public company will require, or very often a public company will require, that a director already have prior governance experience at a for-profit company. And that could maybe be private company governance experience. It doesn't necessarily have to be a public company, but sometimes they will stipulate that as well. That oftentimes comes up in our conversations with boards. We actively try to encourage them not to be restrained by that, but that is oftentimes a preference for public company boards. Whereas private company, I think there's more of a focus on, has this person had experience at a company like ours, be that, like ours in a similar industry, in a similar functional area that we're struggling with, or at a particular kind of scale or pace of growth. How difficult is it to move from a small cap board to a large cap one? Not as hard, I think, as it is to just get in on your first board. So there are a lot of challenges that exist for people getting on their first board, frankly. I mean, it is because there is a perception oftentimes from boards that they would like their candidates to have prior board experience. There can be a little bit of a chicken and egg challenge here, right? Where you say, okay, gosh, how do I get the board experience if I'm required to have board experience to get board experience? That can be frustrating and challenging for candidates. But once you have governance experience at a for-profit board and you're doing good work, I think don't underestimate. We spend so much time often, I think, focusing on getting the board opportunity. But certainly I do want to make the point, it's very important to dedicate the time, make sure you have the capacity and the time, and that the board is looking for, that what the board is looking for is the value you can deliver. Oftentimes there's kind of a mismatch of expectations that can not serve either the board or the candidate well. So be sure that you've cleared up all that before you join a board, and then just do great work. That will beget more opportunities. Once you're doing good work on a board, you'll be talked about, right? So the other directors that you're working with will start referring you to other opportunities. So I would say the hurdle to get from a small company board to a larger one, much lower than just getting your foot there in the door to begin with, which is why we spend so much time talking about that initial value proposition, how to leverage your network, et cetera. Question about SPACs. How do SPACs figure into the landscape? Well, there's been a lot of SPAC activity, as you've probably seen in the last couple of years. I remember literally there was one week where I just said, where did this all come from? And it has been nonstop ever since. We get calls from SPACs all the time to build out boards, because typically, or what we found is that they're trying to build boards pretty quickly. And so normally they will have a number of director roles open and available with a timeline associated with it. They want to move pretty quickly. So with a SPAC, I think, what's interesting about that is, I think what we hear from candidates or people that are serving on boards is that serving on a SPAC can look quite different from serving on a more traditional public company or a private company. Because typically, or I shouldn't say typically, again, all of this comes with kind of the caveat that every company is different, but a lot of SPACs are interested in having people with expertise in the area where they're looking to target acquisitions. And so they're usually looking for people that can help do due diligence on acquisition targets, or they're trying to cover off usually on the SEC requirements for the type of skill set. For example, they have to put together an audit committee to be a public company. And so they might be looking for that specific skill set. So I guess I would say the search process doesn't look too different. They tend to be looking for either people that have expertise in the target company areas that they're looking at, and or that satisfy kind of SEC requirements. But very active. There are a lot of them out there. Can be a really good place, I think, particularly if you feel good about the others on the board, to build out your board network and to get some initial governance experience. So hopefully that answers the question. Would the board list be visible to Southeast Asia or APAC countries? If not, how do I brand myself in that region? So good, I'm glad you asked this. The board list is open to anyone around the world. We have candidates from every corner of the globe. We officially operate in the markets of in North America and Canada and the US. And by that, I mean, we're actively trying to foster a marketplace by building up a candidate base and building up demand for that candidate base. So we're trying to make sure that there is a natural market for the talent in North America. We're not doing that as proactively and actively in other markets, but that's not to say that it doesn't exist. A company in Asia can be looking for candidates in Asia, and there's nothing that prevents them from interacting on the board list. And in fact, that does happen. We do oftentimes have companies call us from, we've been pretty active in the Middle East, in Europe, and in Asia. So it's absolutely not unheard of, but the bulk of our work is in North America. I would seek, again, my recommendation will be slightly generic, not knowing exactly where in APAC you're located, but there have been a tremendous number of resources, both on the nonprofit side and on the for-profit side, that are actively working to bring greater diversity to boards. And in many countries, particularly Europe, there's been a huge effort to bring greater diversity. So seek out the opportunities to work with organizations that are focused on direct candidates, in addition to the board list, just to really build out the idea of kind of having your name in multiple places. So thanks for asking that. All right, I'm going to pause on questions for a moment. There are a number of others, so I'll scan them and see if I can address any more, but I did want to just see if we had any value propositions posted in. Let's see. Oh, actually, I do want to address one question that I saw come up that I think is relevant for so many. I'm an executive, but not a CEO or a VP. 1 to 2 levels down from the CEO for the last 10 years. Is that a non-starter, or is there a way to still present myself as a candidate? That's definitely not a non-starter. Like I said, in the past, days of yore, the CEO profile is the go-to, and there weren't that many opportunities for other backgrounds. Today, given the challenges and the specificity of those challenges and the degree of expertise that's required to be represented in the boardroom to effectively address those challenges, absolutely boards are looking at other functional areas. And depending on the level of response, I would not get so tied up in title as I would on level of responsibility. I like to use sometimes Google as this example. Google, a VP at Google is a C-suite role at any other company, right? You have massive span of control at that level at Google. So I think people are well aware that titles mean different things at different companies, number one. And what they're going to be interested in is, what have you done? What is the value proposition? What have you built? What have you grown? What have you, transformed in your career? And if that is valuable experience, that is at, the level that will be helpful for that board, absolutely are a valuable candidate. So it's definitely not a non-starter. If you are worried about kind of level and expertise, I oftentimes say, again, really interesting to start at smaller companies and not be discouraged by the fact that maybe a public company isn't knocking on your door today. But if you go get some governance experience at smaller companies, VC backed, PE backed, or a family run business, etc., there are lots of different ways of doing it. That's a great way to start your journey, and those opportunities will come if you're doing great work in the boardroom. All right. We do have one value proposition, so I'm going to give quick feedback on that and maybe one more question before we pop off. I'm not going to read it every word. I'm just going to give a quick view of this one. This individual has 30 years experience partnering with CEOs and boards to optimize revenue, accelerate time to market, and ensure the value of mergers and acquisitions is fully realized. Delivered over $1 billion in value creation, 25 Fortune 500 mid-market and small companies, led $170 billion M&A activities in healthcare and banking. As the CEO of a global advisory firm, helping organizations in the healthcare and banking space, has served on a private company board and a member of the non-gov committee. This is a great value proposition. So anyway, it goes on for another sentence or two, but just in the interest of time, the reason I think it's a great value proposition is a couple of things. One, I love that we've started off talking about how this individual has worked with CEOs and boards. That already tells me, even if I didn't know in the second paragraph this individual has actually served on a board, I would say, okay, even if this person doesn't have governance experience, they clearly have experience interacting with CEOs and boards and at a kind of an advisory role. So already that's very useful. The other thing I really like about this value proposition is that this individual has given a lot of dollars. Like there are specifics in here about industry, talked about the billion-dollar value creation, talked about the types of companies, the 25 Fortune 500s, led $170 billion of M&A activity. That gives me a sense of the magnitude of work that this individual has done, the magnitude and breadth of experience. Very helpful. Because again, let's say that I am a Series A venture-backed company. I might look at this background and say, that might not be as relevant for me. But if I'm a Fortune 500 company and I'm looking to do some M&A, I might say, gosh, this actually is a profile that fits really well with my business. So it helps me kind of naturally hone in on the types of experiences that are going to be valuable from this individual. I will say, I think this is particularly well written for someone who says they're a CEO of a global advisory firm. So professional services in general can be a little bit tricky. Oftentimes boards are looking for operating experience in a role, kind of been there, done it in growing, scaling a company. And so they, rightly or wrongly, oftentimes will say, gosh, we're not really looking for someone that's done that in either consulting or advisory capacity. But there is absolutely a way to talk about your advisory work or your consulting work that really brings out the kind of impact that you've had with companies. And I love the emphasis on advising CEOs and boards on highly strategic initiatives. So if there are ways to tease that out from your experience, this isn't necessarily directly feedback for this value proposition, but for those of you that are listening that are in professional services, this is a good example of someone that's done that quite nicely. Okay, I'm going to flip back over to questions really quick. Let's see. I'm trying to pick one that I think will be most applicable. Okay. Okay, just a quick one because we only have a minute. Should the board bio be chronological by company or address the course specific skills in a more focused way, company driven or strength driven? The latter is my answer, my quick answer. This is not a traditional bio where you just kind of list your roles and assume that people will know, oh gosh, because they've had this role, they're good at X, Y, or Z. This is instead a place to tell the story. It's to say that I am somebody who, I'll take the example from this board bio that we just read. I am somebody who advises and creates value on revenue generation, right? Like that means you're a growth professional, you're focused on revenue generation. We're not going to be a board that's going to hire you for like your engineering talent, right? So focus on the strengths and the skills that you've built over multiple roles, ideally in your career. So you build a really robust story with a strong evidence base for why you are one of the best out there in doing what you do. Okay, I know there was a lot we didn't get to. There's always a ton of questions in these sessions. So I'm hopeful that this was a good start to your journey and that you've gleaned a couple of tips or tricks from me on the conversation. So welcome to the board list. We're so thrilled to have you and delighted to be promoting you as a candidate to the companies that come and search our platform. So please do create a profile and you will automatically, as a candidate on the board list, also receive our newsletter, which has information about other events where either I or others in our community will be talking about their journey to the boardroom. So please don't hesitate to join those, and hopefully we will be able to answer all your questions over time. So again, thank you for joining today. Hope this was helpful and enjoy the rest of your afternoon.